In 1969, Hollywood found its new face of haunted intensity, with soulful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. Canadian actor Michael Sarrazin wasn't just rising, he was exploding onto the scene alongside legends like Jane Fonda. He starred in one of the most grueling, critically acclaimed films of the era, movie that defined a generation. He had the looks, the raw talent, and the industry in the palm of his hand. He was poised for superstardom, and then, just as quickly as he arrived, he vanished into the ether. How does a leading man, on the verge of the A-list, simply disappear? Did the physical toll of a brutal production break him? Or did he choose to walk away from the bright lights forever? Today, we're digging into the strange, silent disappearance of Michael Sarrazin. To understand the silence that followed his peak, we have to revisit the noise that created it. Michael Sarrazin burst onto the Hollywood scene in the late 1960s. Critics and audiences alike were immediately captivated by his unique presence. He was defined by what many called his soulful eyes, a gaze that could convey deep, troubled emotion without him needing to speak a single word. It was this very intensity that landed him the role of a lifetime in 1969. He was cast as Robert Pollock in director Sidney Pollack's Depression-era masterpiece, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? The film's plot centered on a grueling, days-long dance marathon where desperate contestants pushed themselves past the breaking point for the mere hope of a cash prize. But on this set, art imitated life with brutal accuracy. Director Sidney Pollack didn't want his actors pretending to be exhausted. He wanted them actually exhausted. The shoot became a physical ordeal. Sarrazin was paired with the formidable Jane Fonda, who played the cynical Gloria. Their on-screen chemistry was palpable. Born out of shared real-world suffering, they spent weeks filming in a confined ballroom set. The environment was designed to be oppressive, to create the hazy, grim atmosphere of the Depression. The set was constantly pumped full of special effects, smoke and dust. The cast and crew were breathing this toxic dust in day after day, hour after hour, while dancing until their bodies gave out. It was a physical and mental crucible meant to break them down for the camera. When They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Premiered, it was an instant sensation. It was bleak, powerful, and perfectly captured the cynical mood of the era. The critics raved, and the box office boomed. When Oscar season arrived, the film received a staggering 9 Academy Award nominations. Jane Fonda was nominated for Best Actress. Gig Young famously won for Best Supporting Actor. The director, the writers, almost everyone involved was celebrated by the industry. Everyone, that is, except the man with the soulful eyes right at the center of it all. Michael Sarrazin was completely snubbed by the Academy. Despite the Oscar omission, Sarrazin was undeniably a star. He had held his own against Fonda and delivered an iconic performance in one of the year's biggest and most respected films. The world should have been at his feet. He was supposed to be the next great Hollywood leading man, but as the 1970s dawned, instead of rocketing to the stratosphere, Michael Sarrazin began a slow, strange retreat into the shadows, and the reasons why may have started on that toxic, exhausting dance floor. The snub from the Academy was merely the first crack in the foundation. While the world watched Jane Fonda ascend to the height of her powers, Michael Sarrazin was dealing with a professional heartbreak that few in Hollywood ever truly recover from. In the same year that he was enduring the physical torment of the dance marathon, another director had come calling. John Schlesinger was casting a gritty, groundbreaking film called Midnight Cowboy. He had found his Joe Buck. He didn't want Jon Voight, he wanted the man with the soulful eyes. Michael was so close to the role that he was actually on his way to Texas for a costume fitting, but at the very last second the trap door opened. Universal, the studio that held Michael's contract in an iron grip, refused to release him. They demanded a loan-out fee so exorbitant that the producers of Midnight Cowboy simply couldn't pay it. Michael was called back from the airport, forced to watch from the sidelines as the role of a lifetime was handed to someone else. It was a sliding doors moment that defined the rest of his career. While Jon Voight rode Joe Buck straight to the A-list, Michael remained a company man, bound to a studio that seemed more interested in his contract than his craft. Yet, on the surface, Michael's life looked like a dream. He had become one half of Hollywood's most luminous golden couple. While filming The Sweet Ride, he had met the breathtaking Jacqueline Bisset. For the next 7 years, they were the darlings of the paparazzi, a pair of impossibly beautiful stars navigating the shifting sands of the 1970s. But those who looked closer at Michael began to see a man who was carrying more than just the weight of a lost role. The physical toll of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Had never quite left his system. On that set, the toxic dust pumped into the ballroom to create a Depression-era haze had just been a visual effect. It was an environmental hazard that the cast breathed in for weeks on end. Some believe this constant exposure to chemicals and physical exhaustion triggered a long-term decline in his health. He began to develop a reputation for being emotionally wounded, co-stars later recalled. A man who seemed lonely and desperate, even in the middle of a crowded film set. He was becoming a ghost in his own life. A dull screen presence, according to some critics who failed to see the quiet tragedy unfolding behind his eyes. Despite the internal struggle, Michael kept working. He starred in cult classics like The Reincarnation of Peter Proud and played a hauntingly sensitive creature in the television masterpiece Frankenstein, The True Story. But the prestige was fading. The big career-defining scripts were no longer landing on his desk. By the mid-1970s, the man who was supposed to be the next big thing was instead being cast in road race comedies and B-movie thrillers. The Hollywood system, which had once fought so hard to keep him, was beginning to lose interest. Jacqueline Bisset would later reflect on their time together, noting that Michael had a wild and vulnerable energy that made him difficult to reach. As their relationship eventually dissolved, the last of Michael's tethers to the Hollywood elite seemed to snap. He was a man out of time, a flower child anti-hero in an era that was moving toward the hard-edged action of the 80s. The silence was getting louder. The industry that had promised him everything was now treating him like a relic of a bygone era. By the late 1970s, the soulful eyes were no longer appearing on billboards. Michael Sarrazin was entering the final act of his Hollywood story, a slow, deliberate retreat that would eventually take him far away from the smog of Los Angeles and back to the quiet winters of Canada. But the mystery of what truly broke him remained. Was it the toxic dust in his lungs, the heartbreak of the roles he lost, or a deeper realization that the fame he had chased was a hollow prize? By the early 1980s, the Hollywood that Michael Sarrazin had once conquered was a distant memory. He had become a victim of the very system that claimed to love him, a leading man who was too soulful for the neon-soaked blockbusters of a new decade. Michael made a decision that few actors have the courage to follow through on. He packed his bags and left the smog of Los Angeles for good. He returned to Montreal, seeking the quiet stability of his Canadian roots and a life away from the relentless scrutiny of the paparazzi. In Montreal, Michael found a peace that Hollywood had denied him. He wasn't a fading star there. He was a respected elder statesman of the craft. He began working in Canadian cinema and television, often appearing in projects that allowed him to use his intelligence and his trademark intensity without the pressure of carrying a multi-million-dollar studio budget. He became a staple of the Montreal arts scene, a man who would rather discuss philosophy or literature in a quiet bistro than attend a red carpet premiere. But the physical toll of his early years continued to cast a long shadow. Those close to him noted that he never quite regained the robust health of his youth. The legends of the toxic dust on the set of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Persisted. Many wondered if the grueling conditions of that 1969 shoot had caused permanent damage to his respiratory system, damage that would only make itself known decades later. Michael, ever the private soul, rarely complained. He carried his struggles with the same quiet dignity he brought to his best roles. In early 2011, the mystery of Michael Sarrazin took its final, tragic turn. He was diagnosed with cancer, a battle he fought with typical privacy and reserve. The decline was rapid. Just a few months after his diagnosis, surrounded by his family and his two daughters, Catherine and Michelle, the man with the soulful eye slipped away. He was 70 years old. When the news of his passing reached Hollywood, it was met with a strange sort of collective guilt. Tributes poured in from former co-stars like Jane Fonda and Jacqueline Bisset, who remembered him not as a celebrity, but as a deeply sensitive, often misunderstood artist. The industry realized, perhaps too late, that they had let one of their most unique talents slip through their fingers. He was the man who almost played Joe Buck, the man who nearly defined a generation, but instead became a haunting footnote in cinema history. Today, Michael Sarrazin is remembered primarily for those few years when his face was everywhere. His legacy lives on in the sweat-soaked frames of the dance marathon and the melancholic gaze of a creature looking for its soul. He remains a symbol of a brief window in time when Hollywood valued vulnerability over muscle and art over spectacle. The disappearance of Michael Sarrazin wasn't an act of cowardice or a failure of talent. It was the choice of a man who refused to let a cold, corporate industry break his spirit. He chose to live on his own terms, leaving behind a body of work that still resonates with anyone who has ever felt like an outsider. He may have vanished from the billboards, but in the hearts of those who truly value the craft of acting, the man with the soulful eyes will never truly be forgotten.